Hello there, weary traveler, and welcome to this warm little corner of history. Before we set off on our journey back to the biting winters of medieval times, let me offer you a heartfelt greeting. Are you tucked under a cozy blanket, ready to unwind, or simply taking a break from the chaos of modern life? Wherever you are and whatever the time, I'm so glad you're here. Let me ask you something. What's winter like for you? Do you think of twinkling lights, warm fireplaces, and steaming cups of cocoa? Or maybe you picture chilly mornings and icy winds that bite at your nose. Either way, today's winters, no matter how cold, pale in comparison to those faced by the people of medieval Europe. So, let's step back in time together and uncover what it truly meant to endure the cold. Picture this. It's late autumn in the medieval countryside. The last leaves have long since fallen, and the sun hangs low in the sky, casting pale golden rays that barely warm the air. The fields are frosty, and every step crunches underfoot. A cold breeze carries the first flurries of snow, whispering of the long, harsh season ahead. Winter is coming, and for the people of this age, it means one thing: survival. But let's pause for a moment. Did you know medieval winters weren't always this brutal? There was a time when the seasons came and went with a certain predictability. Snowfall, though inconvenient, wasn't a harbinger of fear. Then something changed. Starting in the 14th century, the world entered a period known as the Little Ice Age, a time when winters grew colder, longer, and more unforgiving. Imagine the impact: crops failing under snow-heavy skies, rivers frozen solid, and icy winds seeping through walls that offered little protection. The Great Frost of 1709, for instance, turned London's River Thames into a frozen market street. People walked, skated, and even lit fires on the ice. It sounds enchanting at first glance, doesn't it? But beneath the surface lay tragedy. Countless lives lost to cold, starvation, and despair. Now think of those who had the luxury of retreating from the elements. One of the more curious stories from this era involves a young Isaac Newton. When winter's icy grip forced him to leave Cambridge and return home to his family farm, the solitude and warmth of the fire gave him the space to develop some of his most groundbreaking ideas. Can you imagine? A bitter winter, instead of stifling him, fueled the brilliance that changed the course of science forever. But what about the rest? For the vast majority, winter wasn't a season of inspiration. It was a fight for survival. Close your eyes and step into the shoes of a medieval peasant. You wake up in a one-room cottage shared with your entire family. The air is thick with smoke from a sputtering fire, and your breath mists before you as you rise from your straw mattress. Every crack in the walls lets the cold seep in, numbing your fingers and toes. Breakfast, if there's any, is a meager bowl of porridge or a piece of stale bread. Outside, the livestock huddle together in a frost-covered barn, their breath steaming in the icy air. As the day stretches on, you trudge through snow, gathering firewood with chapped hands. The work is grueling, but without it, your family won't survive the night. And yet, even amid the cold and hunger, people found ways to endure. Communities came together, leaning on one another for strength. One of the most remarkable traditions of the time was the Feast of Saint Stephen, celebrated on December 26th. For a single day, the social order flipped. A peasant or servant was crowned Lord of Misrule, presiding over a lively day of feasting, singing, and laughter. Can you picture it? a humble villager, standing tall and commanding the attention of their betters, if only for a day. The rigid hierarchies dissolved into laughter and camaraderie. It was a brief but welcome reprieve from the bleakness of winter. Let's shift the scene now. Imagine a small medieval village blanketed in snow. Smoke rises from chimneys curling into a leaden sky, a sign of life in an otherwise frozen landscape. Inside the homes, families gather around hearths, telling stories and sharing what little they have. Can you hear the murmur of voices, the crackle of firewood, the laughter that defies the cold? The bonds of community were a lifeline. Neighbors checked on one another, bringing firewood, food, or simply companionship. They found solace in shared struggles, knowing that together they could withstand the coldest nights. Still, winter stretched on relentlessly. Snow piled higher, ice thickened on rivers, and the days grew darker. Yet amid the hardship, hope remained. The people of medieval times knew that spring, no matter how distant, would come again. They watched for signs with eager eyes. The gradual lengthening of days, the first hint of thaw in the earth. Plough Monday marked this renewal of life. Farmers brought out their ploughs, which had lain idle for months, and blessed them in ceremonies brimming with joy and gratitude. The first cut into the thawing soil was a symbol of survival, a promise of better days ahead. Now let me ask you, how do you think we would fare in such a world? Could we find resilience in community, joy in small victories, and hope in the promise of spring? The lessons of those long, frigid winters go beyond survival. They remind us of the strength found in connection, the power of enduring hope, and the human spirit's incredible ability to adapt and persevere. And so, as we end this journey through medieval winters, let's carry these lessons with us. Whether it's the cold outside your window or the challenges of life, remember this. Even in the darkest times, the promise of spring is always waiting, just around the corner. As the first furrows were cut into the thawing earth, relief swept through the hearts of medieval villagers. Winter's icy grip was finally loosening, and with it, the promise of spring began to take shape. Life had been unimaginably hard, bitterly so. The cold had seeped into their homes, their bones, and even their spirits. Yet they endured. Through the hunger, the dark nights, and the uncertainty, they held fast to the hope that better days would come. Imagine a medieval village blanketed in snow. Chimneys released thin spirals of smoke into a gray sky, a sign of life in an otherwise frozen world. Inside a small cottage, families huddled together, their breaths visible in the icy air. Breakfast was sparse, a bowl of porridge if they were lucky. Outside, livestock shivered in barns, their frosted coats glistening in the dim light. Even for the privileged, winter was relentless. In grand castles, the cold crept through thick stone walls. Servants worked tirelessly to stockpile firewood, preserve food, and seal gaps. But even these efforts couldn't keep the chill entirely at bay. In one tragic tale, Queen Elizabeth of Hungary succumbed to the cold in her own castle, found frozen in her bed on a bitter January morning in 1326. For most, winter was a daily battle for survival. Gathering firewood was backbreaking, the cold biting at fingers and faces. Scarcity loomed large, with each passing day bringing them closer to the edge of their food stores. Yet, amidst the struggle, people found resilience and even joy. One such beacon of light was the Feast of St. Stephen, celebrated on December 26th. For a day, the rigid social hierarchy was turned on its head. A servant or peasant would be crowned Lord of Misrule, presiding over laughter, feasting, and revelry. Imagine the scene, a humble villager giving playful commands to their superiors, while neighbors shared food, drink, and companionship. It was a brief escape, a moment of warmth amid the season's chill. But the medieval winter wasn't just about enduring the cold. It was about finding meaning in togetherness. Families gathered around hearths, telling stories and singing songs. Neighbors helped one another, offering firewood, food, or even just a kind word. Survival depended not only on strength, but on the bonds of community. The arrival of spring was more than a change of season, it was a victory. Days grew longer, the earth softened, and green shoots emerged from the frost-bitten ground. Plow Monday marked this renewal. Farmers blessed their tools and ceremonially cut into the soil, welcoming the start of the growing season. The land, which had lain dormant for months, now promised life and abundance. The Feast of St. Stephen was a rare, cherished reprieve from the unending toil and scarcity of peasant life. For one day, the rigid structures of feudal society softened, and the downtrodden were given a chance to revel in merriment and community. Central to this celebration was the tradition of misrule, a delightful inversion of the social order. On this day, a commoner was crowned the Lord of Misrule, granted temporary authority to preside over the festivities. They issued playful commands to their supposed betters, flipping the hierarchy on its head. Laughter echoed across villages as peasants and nobles alike shared in games, feasting, and carousing. It was fleeting, yes, but this brief suspension of the oppressive social norms served as a vital pressure valve for the simmering tensions of medieval life. These gatherings were more than an escape from hardship. They were a survival mechanism. Winter's unyielding cruelty threatened not only bodies, but spirits, and the bonds of fellowship and goodwill forged during these celebrations sustained communities through the harshest of times. One poignant tale from 1377 recounts two peasant families, neighbors whose food supplies had dwindled to nothing as winter dragged on. On the verge of starvation, they pooled their last scraps to share a modest meal on the Feast of St. Stephen. That small act of generosity gave them the strength to endure the season's remaining trials. These gestures of compassion were the marrow of medieval society during winter. A traveler offering firewood to a frost-bitten neighbor, or a villager giving an extra log to a shivering widow, often meant the difference between life and death. Such acts of interdependence were a quiet rebellion against an era often marked by ruthless inequality. But even the warmth of communal goodwill couldn't outlast winter's relentless onslaught. The feast was but a flare of light in an otherwise dark and frozen season. As the days trudged into January, February, and March, hunger gnawed at empty bellies, and the bitter cold seeped past even the best stoked hearths. The distant promise of spring felt like a fragile dream slipping further from reach. Yet medieval people endured. Year after year, they defied unimaginable adversity. The strength and unity cultivated in winter's crucible kept them alive, even as the land lay dormant and the sun withdrew. Imagine the profound relief that came with the first signs of winter's retreat. The air softened ever so slightly, daylight stretched a little longer, and icicles dripped as if yielding to the sun's growing power. These subtle changes were nothing short of miraculous to those who had endured months of unrelenting struggle. No day embodied this renewal better than Plough Monday, the symbolic start of the agricultural year. Falling on the first Monday after Epiphany in early January, it was a day of hope and preparation. Though the land was still gripped by frost, farmers took their plows to the fields in a ritual that declared winter's eventual defeat. Can you picture it? The snow receding in patches, revealing earth waiting to be turned. Draft animals freshly harnessed leaned into their first labor of the year, and villagers cheered as the frozen soil gave way to the plow's blade. Each furrow carved into the earth was a declaration of resilience, a blow against the icy tyranny of winter. This act of renewal carried profound meaning. Plough Monday was more than a day of work. It was a tangible reminder that spring would return, no matter how cruel the cold had been. It reassured weary farmers that their patience and fortitude had not been in vain. The sight of furrowed fields, bathed in strengthening sunlight, symbolized victory. Each overturned clod proclaimed humanity's persistence in the face of nature's caprice. It was a reminder that, no matter how harsh or unyielding the season, people could endure, rebuild, and thrive. In the modern world, with our central heating, electric blankets, and stocked supermarkets, it's hard to imagine the unrelenting hardships of a medieval winter. The cold months were more than an inconvenience, they were a battle for survival. When we grumble about a delayed flight or a rainy commute, we might pause to reflect on the sheer resilience of our ancestors, who faced winters without any of the comforts we now take for granted. For medieval people, every winter was a test of endurance. They fought bitter cold, hunger, and sickness year after year, finding strength in the smallest joys and the bonds of community. It's a testament to the human spirit that they not only survived, but found moments of light in the darkness. As the new year began, life settled into the harsh rhythm of winter. Days were short and icy. Nights were long and frigid. The lucky found some warmth in smoky cottages or drafty manors. For the less fortunate, winter was a constant struggle. One of the greatest threats during winter was sickness. In cramped, unsanitary homes, diseases spread rapidly. Even minor illnesses like the common cold brought misery, leaving people red-nosed and weary. More serious illnesses, like influenza, struck with devastating force. The winter of 1557 saw a particularly deadly flu outbreak, killing over 10,000 people in Paris alone. Pneumonia was another deadly foe, preying on those weakened by hunger or cold. Damp, unheated homes provided the perfect conditions for the disease to take hold, filling lungs with fluid and making breathing impossible. Families often lost several members to pneumonia in a single winter, leaving behind orphaned children and shattered lives. Even royalty wasn't spared. Castles and courts, with their constant flow of visitors, became breeding grounds for disease. Henry VIII's beloved wife, Jane Seymour, likely died from postnatal complications worsened by poor hygiene and winter's chill. Children were especially vulnerable. Harsh weather, limited food, and unsanitary conditions meant many never reached adulthood. In 16th century London, half of all children died before their 5th birthday. One heartbreaking tradition called bone lace involved tying a black ribbon to the hand of a gravely ill infant. If the child died, the ribbon would be used to secure their burial shroud, a somber reminder of winter's toll on the youngest and most innocent. For the poor, even basic necessities like food and warmth were hard to come by. Firewood was a precious resource, often heavily regulated. A peasant family might huddle around a meager fire fueled by straw and dung, sharing the space with shivering livestock. Food supplies dwindled as winter dragged on. The bounty of the autumn harvest was a distant memory, and spring's fresh greens were still months away. Families survived on salted meat, dried peas, and coarse bread. If they were lucky, they might forage for hardy winter foods like nettles or wild garlic to add some variety to their meals. Even these meager diets could vanish in times of famine. The Great Famine of 1315, caused by relentless rains that ruined crops, plunged northern Europe into chaos. Contemporary accounts tell of desperate people eating dogs, horses, and even human flesh. Some parents, unable to bear their children's suffering, smothered them as an act of mercy. Entire villages perished, and unburied bodies littered fields and streets. Winter didn't just test physical survival, it shaped every aspect of medieval life. People hunkered down in their homes, finding solace in family and community. Travel was dangerous, so most socializing happened close to home. Amusement came in simple forms. Families gathered around flickering rushlights or candles, sharing stories and songs to pass the long evenings. Women sewed and wove, while men carved or repaired tools. For the literate few, winter offered a chance to enjoy books, though these were rare and precious. A humble tradesman might own a Bible and a single volume of tales, while the wealthy displayed elaborate, hand-illuminated manuscripts. Religious practices also reflected the season. Long, dark nights were filled with prayers for safety and warmth, while the scarce daylight hours were used for tasks necessary to survive. Winter was a time of drawing inward, both physically and spiritually. Despite the hardships, medieval people found moments of joy and togetherness. The Feast of St. Stephen, celebrated on December 26th, was one such occasion. For a single day, the rigid social hierarchy was upended. A peasant or servant was crowned Lord of Misrule, presiding over feasting, games, and merriment. This brief escape from the drudgery of peasant life wasn't just about fun, it was a survival mechanism. In the oppressive feudal system, the Feast of St. Stephen acted as a pressure valve, releasing tensions and fostering goodwill. Neighbors came together to share food, laughter, and companionship, strengthening the bonds that helped them endure the long winter. One story from 1377 tells of two peasant families who had exhausted their food supplies. On the verge of starvation, they pooled their last scraps to share a humble meal on the Feast of St. Stephen. That act of generosity gave them the strength to survive the rest of the season's harshness. Winter's hardships forged a culture of interdependence. A neighbor offering firewood or food could mean the difference between life and death. This sense of community was vital in an era where survival often came down to shared resources and mutual support. As the weeks dragged into February and March, even the strongest spirits were tested. Food stores dwindled, and the cold seemed unending. Yet every year people endured. They clung to the hope that spring would come, no matter how distant it seemed. The first signs of winter's retreat were met with profound relief. Icicles began to drip, daylight stretched a little longer, and the air grew less bitter. These small changes were miracles to those who had faced months of unrelenting cold and hunger. Plough Monday, celebrated in early January, marked the beginning of the agricultural year. Though the ground was still frozen, the ritual of preparing the fields symbolized hope and renewal. Farmers blessed their plows and harnessed their animals, ready to greet the thawing earth. Each furrow turned in the soil was a victory, a declaration that life would go on. For medieval people, Plough Monday wasn't just about work. It was about survival, resilience, and the promise of brighter days ahead. In the harsh grip of winter, medieval families found ways to endure the long, cold months. Those who could read often read aloud to their households, transforming bleak evenings into moments of shared entertainment. Tales of brave knights, clever tricksters, and star-crossed lovers captured the imagination, offering an escape from the close confines of drafty homes. The legendary adventures of King Arthur and his court were particularly cherished, their noble themes lifting listeners far beyond the frozen world outside. For others, less virtuous diversions filled the winter days. Gambling with dice was a popular pastime, though it often led to heated arguments and empty purses. The clatter of knucklebones echoed in taverns and great halls as fortunes were won and lost. Drink was another common comfort. Ale, mead, and wine flowed freely, warming both bodies and spirits. Public houses thrived in winter, offering companionship, entertainment, and a brief escape from the biting cold. Of course, the revelry often loosened tongues, leading to lively debates, bawdy songs, and the occasional brawl. Winter also brought quiet moments of reflection and spiritual devotion. With agricultural work at a standstill, many people turned to prayer and penance. Churches became sanctuaries where the faithful sought solace, spending hours fingering rosary beads with hands numb from the cold. Charitable acts were seen as Christian duties, and in a season of scarcity, even small gestures of generosity could save lives. Feeding the hungry, clothing the poor, and comforting the sick were vital acts of kindness that kept communities together. But winter's challenges also exposed the darker sides of human nature. Desperation drove some to crime, with theft and violence increasing as the season stretched on. Overcrowded jails offered little relief, leaving the accused to await their fate in freezing, unsanitary conditions. Punishments were harsh: fines, floggings, and even executions meted out to deter wrongdoing. Still, amid the struggle, people clung to the promise of spring. The feast of St. Valentine on February 14th offered a bright spot in the heart of winter. By the 15th century, the custom of drawing names for Valentine's sweethearts was well established. Young men and women exchanged tokens of affection, flowers, sweets, or handwritten verses. These simple acts of love brought warmth and joy to the coldest days. Yet, as February gave way to Lent, the season's austerity returned. The snowdrops and crocuses breaking through the frost hinted at spring's arrival, but winter's grip remained firm. Survival demanded every ounce of resilience and determination. For the poorest peasants, winter was particularly brutal. Ragged woolen garments, suffocating in summer, offered little protection against the cold. Families huddled in smoky hovels, their breath visible in the frigid air. Firewood was scarce, and many relied on makeshift fires of straw and dung to keep warm. The animals suffered alongside their owners. A draft horse, Ribs, visible beneath its shaggy coat, might dream of lush summer grass while chewing on its meager ration of hay. Cows mooed mournfully, their teats chapped and raw from the cold. Even the barn cats, usually so aloof, huddled for warmth, their frost-bitten whiskers a reminder of the season's cruelty. Nobles in their castles fared better, but were not immune to winter's challenges. Silk gowns and velvet cloaks were little defense against the chill of stone walls. Kitchens worked tirelessly to produce hot meals, their fires straining to warm vast, drafty halls. Even royalty struggled, King Henry II of England, reportedly shivering uncontrollably, once ordered a chair, burned simply to warm himself. His temper, it was said, could ignite faster than the flames if his discomfort persisted. As winter dragged on, sickness became an ever-present danger. Influenza, pneumonia, and other illnesses swept through communities, claiming lives regardless of age or status. Cramped living conditions and poor sanitation allowed diseases to spread rapidly. The winter of 1557 was particularly deadly, with a virulent flu outbreak killing over 10,000 people in Paris alone. Children were especially vulnerable. In 16th century London, half of all children born in winter did not survive to their 5th birthday. The practice of tying a black ribbon to the hand of a gravely ill infant, known as bone lace, was a grim reflection of the times. If the child passed away, the ribbon was used to secure their burial shroud, a somber reminder of winter's toll on the most innocent. Yet, even in the face of such suffering, medieval people found moments of levity. They gathered in taverns and homes, telling stories, singing songs, and finding comfort in one another's company. The bonds of family and community were vital, providing the strength needed to face each day. The promise of spring was their guiding light. The sight of snow melting, daylight lengthening, and the first flowers blooming lifted spirits immeasurably. Plough Monday, celebrated in early January, marked the beginning of the agricultural year. Farmers blessed their plows and ceremonially prepared the fields, declaring their defiance of winter's grip. These rituals symbolized hope and renewal, reminding people that winter's hardships were not eternal. With each furrow turned in the thawing soil, they proclaimed their resilience and determination to persevere. As winter's shadows finally began to recede, the lessons of the season lingered. Medieval life was a constant struggle, yet it was also a testament to the human capacity for endurance. Faith, family, and community sustained them through the darkest times. The snow-covered fields and frost-laden trees might appear picturesque to us now, but for medieval people, they were reminders of a season that tested every fiber of their being. And yet, year after year, they survived. They found joy in small acts, hope in the promise of spring, and strength in their shared humanity. For all its hardships, winter was a crucible that forged remarkable resilience. It shaped lives and communities, leaving a legacy of endurance that echoes through history. For both peasants and kings, winter in medieval times felt endless, a relentless slog of cold, hunger, and hardship. Relief came only in the form of occasional celebrations or feast days, brief respites of joy in an otherwise bleak season. these moments of levity were cherished, offering a glimpse of light in the oppressive darkness. Perhaps the most anticipated was the Feast of St. Stephen, celebrated on December 26th. On this day, tradition turned social order on its head. A peasant was crowned the Lord of Misrule, temporarily taking charge in a sanctioned rebellion of mirth. The lowliest serf would command his superiors with mock authority, filling the day with laughter. For a single day, the rigid hierarchies dissolved, and all came together as equals to revel in food, games, and communal joy. But all too soon, the festivities would end, and reality would return. The misrule was set right, and the cold, hard routines of winter resumed. People returned to their chores, their meager hearths, and their relentless battle against the freezing winds. Yet, even as winter pressed on, acts of quiet compassion warmed hearts. Neighbors shared what little they had with those who had even less. A well-known story tells of Dame Matilda of York, who gave her only cloak to a beggar woman. Shivering through her walk home, Matilda smiled when asked about her selflessness, saying, "The warmth of human kindness is a fire that never goes out." Such acts of generosity, rare as they were, revealed the strength of spirit that helped medieval people endure. Though winter froze their bodies, it could not extinguish the flame of compassion within their hearts. As winter dragged on, the first signs of spring became symbols of triumph. The initial green buds breaking through frost were more than just a seasonal change. They were proof of survival. For those who had endured the freezing months, spring brought hope and renewal, a testament to their resilience and unyielding will. When spring finally arrived, it was greeted with immense relief. The sun lingered a little longer each day. Snow melted into rivers, and people emerged from their homes like bears, shaking off hibernation. Children laughed as they played in the mud, marveling at the first flowers breaking through thawed ground. In the fields, farmers celebrated Plough Monday, the first Monday after Epiphany. This day marked the start of the agricultural year. Draft animals adorned with ribbons and garlands paraded through villages as bells rang in celebration. The procession marked the return to life and work, a festive declaration that winter's hold was finally loosening. Inside homes, the relief was palpable. Faces etched with worry over the long, cold months began to soften into smiles. Chimneys puffed smoke once again, signaling warmth and comfort. Soon, fresh vegetables and fruits would replace the bland, preserved foods that had sustained families through winter. It's difficult for us today to fully appreciate the magnitude of this seasonal shift. For medieval people, the arrival of spring wasn't just a change in weather. It was a triumph of life over death. The greening trees and blooming meadows mirrored their own feelings of renewal. Songs and verses from the Middle Ages capture this joy. One English song cheerfully proclaimed, "Loudly sing cuckoo, the seed is growing, the meadow is blooming, the wood is springing anew. Sing cuckoo." These simple yet vibrant lines reflect the elation medieval people felt as winter's oppression gave way to the warmth and light of spring. Despite their harsh conditions, medieval people endured, bound together by the strength of their communities and their determination to survive. Winter tested their resilience, but it also revealed their humanity. In the depths of winter, reading aloud became a cherished pastime. Those who could read shared stories with their households, transporting listeners far from their cold, cramped surroundings. Tales of King Arthur's noble court, cunning tricksters, and star-crossed lovers entertained and uplifted. Other diversions, less wholesome but equally effective, filled the long days. Gambling with dice brought both excitement and disputes, as fortunes were won and lost in taverns and great halls. Meanwhile, ale, mead, and wine flowed freely, warming spirits and easing the chill. Public houses became hubs of fellowship, laughter, and the occasional brawl. Winter also offered time for spiritual reflection. With agricultural work paused, many turned to prayer, penance, and acts of charity. Churches welcomed the faithful, who knelt in the cold and meditated on their eternal souls. Giving to the poor was seen as a duty, and small acts of kindness made a significant difference in such a harsh season. But the same season that inspired charity also bred desperation. Hunger and cold often drove people to crime. Theft, violence, and other offenses rose as winter dragged on. Overcrowded jails, dark and freezing, held the accused until trials could be conducted in better weather. Punishments were swift and harsh, ranging from fines to floggings to executions. Even so, people found ways to endure. The feast of Saint Valentine on February 14th brought a welcome distraction. By the 15th century, the tradition of drawing Valentine names was a well-loved custom. Young men and women exchanged tokens of affection, including flowers and handwritten notes. These simple acts of love brought warmth to the coldest of days. As spring approached, life began to brighten. Crocuses and snowdrops poked through frost, promising warmer days ahead. Farmers prepared their fields with renewed energy, knowing the worst of winter was behind them. For medieval people, survival was a yearly battle. They faced each winter armed only with their will, their faith, and the strength of their communities. When the snows finally melted and the sun returned, it was more than a change of season, it was a victory. Her bones ached fiercely in the cold as Agnes fumbled with trembling hands to kindle a fire. Despite her best efforts, the wood refused to light. Just as she was about to give up hope, there came a knock at her door. It was Tom, a young village lad with cheeks ruddy from the biting wind. He brought an armful of logs, a sack of dried peas, and a hunk of salted pork donated by the villagers. Tears welled in Agnes's eyes as Tom stoked a roaring blaze in her hearth. Warmth seeped back into her frail body for the first time in weeks. Such acts of generosity were common in these lean times, a testament to the human spirit. The wealthy were not exempt from compassion. Lady Margaret, wife of the local earl, was renowned for her charity during the winter months. While her castle larders were well stocked, she insisted on sending wagons of grains and preserved food to the poorest peasants in her husband's domain. Many of her high-born peers scoffed, viewing the peasants as little more than livestock. But Lady Margaret believed it her Christian duty to care for the less fortunate. One particularly harsh winter, famine struck the region. Lady Margaret worked tirelessly to stretch the castle's supplies, ordering her cooks to prepare hearty soups and stews for the starving poor who came to the gates. Though the kitchen boys grumbled at the extra work, the head cook, Bernard, shared her sense of responsibility. He used every turnip, potato, and scrap of meat to bulk out the stew. For some, this meager soup was the only meal they would have for days. When the castle's provisions began to run low, Lady Margaret quietly sold her jewelry to buy more supplies from neighboring towns. Her husband chose to look the other way, respecting her piety even as he worried about their own future. The church also played a vital role in aiding the suffering. Monasteries opened their doors to the poor and sick, offering straw beds and simple meals of bread and ale. Some monasteries even ran primitive hospitals. The monks saw this as their holy duty, emulating Christ's compassion. Brother William, a young novice, was tasked with caring for the sick in his monastery's hospital. Though the sights and smells of disease made his stomach churn, he diligently ladled broth into the mouths of toothless elders and changed the bandages on festering sores. He prayed for the strength to endure and thanked God that his station spared him from the worst ravages of winter. Winter, after all, was the great equalizer. Though the wealthy could afford thicker woolen garments and luxuries like mulled wine, they still shivered in their drafty manners and worried over dwindling supplies. Death came for them too, often in the form of winter-born illnesses. Lady Isabel, a noblewoman, was heavily pregnant during a particularly brutal cold snap. Though she was sequestered in a warm chamber with attentive maids and a crackling fire, contagion found its way inside. A kitchen maid, coughing incessantly, brought her a posset of warm milk and herbs. Within days, Lady Isabel was burning with fever, her lungs rattling with each breath. Her child was born too soon and did not survive. By week's end, Lady Isabel too had succumbed. Even kings were not immune. Henry VI, a gentle and pious ruler, was deeply troubled by the suffering of his people during the dreadful winter of 1433. Despite the royal physician's tonics of cinnamon and ginger, he sank into melancholy. He would sit by the hearth, unable to warm his hands, lost in his thoughts. Yet, for all its cruelty, winter also inspired resilience. As the days grew longer and the snow began to melt, people dared to hope. The first green buds on skeletal trees and the sight of crocuses breaking through the frost were signs that the dark season was finally loosening its grip. In early spring, the first Monday after Epiphany marked Plough Monday, the start of the agricultural year. Villagers celebrated by blackening their faces with soot and parading through muddy lanes with their plowshares. They sang bawdy songs to wake the slumbering soil, then gathered for hearty food and ale. The festivities symbolized renewal and the promise of brighter days ahead. This cycle of survival played out across all levels of society. In grand halls, dukes and countesses danced to lively tunes, their spirits lifted by the New Year's optimism. The king hosted a feast, tables heaped with delicacies like roast swan and marchpane sweets. Meanwhile, humble peasants like Giles and his family ventured out to their small plot of land, clutching pouches of precious seed, ready to begin again. Even Agnes, the frail widow, who had been on the brink of death, now found herself stirring a bubbling pot of pottage, humming tunelessly. She had survived winter's gauntlet to see another spring dawn. Winter in medieval times was brutal, marked by hunger, cold, and the constant specter of death. Yet it also brought out the best in people. Generosity, community, and hope were the weapons they wielded against the season's unrelenting hardships. The arrival of spring was not taken for granted. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to their resilience. From the wealthiest noble to the poorest peasant, everyone shared in the relief and renewal that came with the thaw. The village lay hushed, braced against winter's onslaught. For most medieval people, winter was not the cozy season of warm fires and feasts we often imagine. Instead, it was a time of bone-chilling cold, gnawing hunger, and sheer survival. The specter of hunger loomed large as crops withered, livestock dwindled, and grain stores ran dangerously low. Families scraped together bitter herbs and shriveled turnips, praying these meager provisions would sustain them. One particularly brutal winter in 1315 saw storms and freezing temperatures ruin harvests, leaving desperate peasants eating the straw from their roofs and boiling leather from their shoes. And yet, they still labored for their lords, exhausted and starving. Hunger weakened the body's defenses, leaving it vulnerable to winter's maladies. A simple cold could spiral into life-threatening pneumonia or bronchitis. Influenza swept through villages like a scythe, claiming the young and old alike as they huddled together in smoky shelters. These cramped, shuttered homes, while warmer than the icy winds outside, carried their own dangers. Packed with families, livestock, and belongings, the stale, smoky air became a breeding ground for disease. In one 14th century Suffolk household, 13 family members shared a single tiny smokehouse with their scrawny chickens and mangy dogs. That any of them survived until spring was nothing short of miraculous. Winter brought dangers beyond illness and hunger. Fires, an ever-present hazard, could destroy entire towns. One misstep with a spark could lead to catastrophe, especially in crowded wooden cities. The Great Fire of London in 1212 began on a cold November night, engulfing the city's cramped lanes while water froze in the pipes. An estimated 3,000 people perished, their shelters reduced to ash, and many more were left to face the freezing winter homeless. Travel in these harsh months was treacherous, roads became muddy quagmires, and snowstorms obscured the way. With limited daylight, losing one's way was a death sentence. In 1311, Queen Isabella of England set out from Canterbury for London as the winter twilight deepened. Her party lost the road and wandered for hours, the pregnant queen weeping, in fear and exhaustion as they stumbled through the icy darkness. Even working animals suffered. Horses and oxen grew gaunt on scant feed, their breaths smoking in the chill air as they trudged through knee-deep snow. Frostbite blackened their extremities, while ice cracked hooves and weakened cartwheels. Yet, even amid winter's bleakness, there were slivers of light. The Feast of St. Stephen, celebrated on December 26th, was a day of charity and goodwill. Churches overflowed with alms for the poor, while lords provided hearty meals for their hungry tenants. The tradition of the Lord of Misrule brought humor and mischief, with a peasant or jester crowned king for the day, presiding over drunken revelry and role reversals. These moments of levity offered a temporary reprieve from winter's hardships. Hope endured, etched in frosty breaths, and whispered in fervent prayers. People clung to the belief that they would survive until spring, that light and warmth would eventually conquer the cold. The relentless snow transformed the landscape into a crystalline wonderland, a scene of beauty masking immense hardship. Icicles hung like daggers from the eaves of peasant hovels and grand manors alike. Fires burned day and night, but their warmth offered only fleeting relief. Smoke from precious flames stung eyes and choked lungs in the close quarters of medieval homes, where humans and livestock huddled together for warmth. For many, even these dubious comforts were unattainable. Food supplies stretched perilously thin, and the poorest subsisted on coarse bread and thin gruel. Hunger was an ever-present shadow, sparing no one, from lowly serfs to crowned kings. In drafty stone castles, rulers shivered beneath piles of furs. Royal households required vast stocks of firewood and provisions to survive the season. Yet, even wealth could not always shield against the cold. A Bohemian princess reportedly froze to death in her own bedchamber, a chilling reminder of winter's indiscriminate cruelty. For peasant families, the loss of a loved one to starvation or disease was heartbreakingly common. Close quarters and poor sanitation made illnesses rampant. Medieval physicians, with treatments rooted more in superstition than science, could do little to stem the tide. Treacherous roads added to winter's woes. Snowdrifts and black ice turned even short journeys into perilous endeavors. Peddlers stayed home, leaving isolated villages without vital goods. Tithes and taxes went uncollected, frustrating lords and clergy. Armies, too, struggled. In 1407, Welsh rebel leader Owain Glyndwr lured English forces into a trap in the snow-choked mountains. Glyndwr's men, accustomed to brutal winters, exploited the conditions to their advantage, achieving a remarkable military feat. And yet, medieval people endured. They clung to moments of hope and resilience. The feast of St. Stephen brought communities together, and the promise of spring whispered through even the harshest storms. When the snow finally began to melt, it marked the start of a new cycle. The first Monday after Epiphany heralded Plough Monday, when villages celebrated the symbolic start of the agricultural year. Men blackened their faces with soot for luck and paraded their plowshares through muddy streets, singing bawdy songs to wake the slumbering soil. Festivities followed with dancing, hearty meals, and ale, a joyful promise of brighter days ahead. Across all levels of society, this seasonal renewal brought relief. In grand halls, dukes and countesses leapt into lively carol dances, their spirits buoyed by the new year. At court, kings hosted lavish feasts, tables piled high with delicacies like roast swan and sweet marzipan. For peasants, the sight of thawing ground and the feel of the sun's warmth on their faces offered hope that the worst was behind them. Hapless in their heavy armor, the English ranks faltered, their resolve shattered by the relentless cold. Many fled, only to succumb to exposure. This stunning victory, secured as much by the unforgiving winter as by Welsh military prowess, cemented Owain Glyndwr's legendary status. It was a bitter reminder of how medieval winters could wield devastation as efficiently as any weapon. The winters of medieval Europe were marked not just by freezing temperatures, but by famines that claimed countless lives. When the cold lingered and spring planting was delayed, food shortages inevitably followed. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 began with an unseasonably wet and chilly spring, rotting seedlings in the ground. Crops failed repeatedly over the next 2 years, plunging much of Europe into starvation. In England, the price of bread soared to 20 times its usual cost. The poor resorted to eating grass, roots, and even the bark from trees. Desperate scavengers exhumed graves in search of sustenance. In cities like Bruges and Ypres, an estimated 10 to 25% of the population perished. The misery was compounded by crime and disease. Malnourished citizens turned to theft and violence, their survival instincts overriding social order. A heartbreaking account from the St. Mary's Abbey Chronicles tells of a starving pregnant woman who stole a loaf of bread. Though she pleaded for mercy, she was hanged. As she died, her baby was born prematurely, falling to the ground. No one dared to touch the infant, and it soon died where it lay. The famine finally eased in 1318 when favorable weather returned, but the specter of starvation haunted every winter. Malnutrition left people vulnerable to diseases that thrived in the close, unsanitary conditions of medieval homes. Influenza, dysentery, and pneumonia swept through cramped quarters where smoky air and filth weakened lungs. Something as simple as a cold could become deadly. Even the era's physicians, limited by superstition, offered little help. Treatments like bleeding and purging often worsened conditions. Emperor Charlemagne is believed to have succumbed to pleurisy during the bitter winter of 814, despite, or perhaps because of, his doctor's ministrations. The Black Death, which ravaged Europe in 1348 to 1349, found fertile ground in these conditions. Malnourished populations huddling together in winter quarters had little resistance to the disease. The plague wiped out 30 to 60% of Europe's population. In Pistoia, Italy, Sir Luca wrote to his brother Francesino, describing the desolation. Many are dead, and many more are dying. Shops are closed and taverns stand empty. Wails of grief echo from the houses, and the stench of rot rises from mass graves. I fear our city may soon be entirely devoid of life. Entire villages were wiped out, their surviving members forced to bury loved ones in hastily dug mass graves. The psychological scars of these losses reverberated for generations, changing the social fabric of medieval Europe forever. Winter was particularly cruel to the most vulnerable, the elderly, young children, and pregnant women. Without modern medicine, many succumbed to cold, disease, or malnourishment. In some medieval societies, infant mortality rates soared as high as 20 to 30%, with many deaths occurring during the harsh winter months. One poignant tale is that of Matilda, the 12-year-old daughter of King Henry I. In the winter of 1120, Matilda sailed aboard the White Ship, which struck a rock and sank in the frigid waters of the English Channel. Though Matilda initially escaped by boarding a rescue boat, her pleas to save her half-brother William led the boat to capsize. Both siblings perished, along with hundreds of others. Her grief-stricken father never recovered, reportedly never smiling again after her loss. For medieval families, freezing to death in drafty homes was a constant risk. Even royalty struggled against winter's icy grasp. King John of England reportedly lost his crown jewels to a high tide in East Anglia during the winter of 1216. Fleeing rebels, his baggage train was swallowed by the sea. Though John narrowly escaped, the loss marked the beginning of his decline. He died of dysentery shortly afterward, his spirit broken. Winter storms frequently wrought havoc on coastal communities. In 1099, a catastrophic flood swept through England, drowning countless towns and lives. Another North Sea flood in 1219 submerged the Netherlands, killing over 50,000 people. With no warning systems or emergency shelters, medieval populations were at the mercy of nature. Inland, people did their best to stay warm. Fires burned day and night, but the risk of accidental blazes was ever present. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records a devastating fire in London in 1132, which began on London Bridge and quickly spread. Before it could be contained, much of the city, including St. Paul's Cathedral, lay in ashes. Still, medieval people found ways to endure. Charity played a vital role, particularly during the Feast of St. Stephen, when lords provided hearty meals for tenants and churches collected alms for the poor. The Lord of Misrule tradition offered a touch of levity, temporarily overturning social hierarchies with revelry and mischief. Even in the face of unrelenting hardship, hope persisted. People prayed for their food stores to last until spring, and for the strength to see another thaw. When winter finally began to loosen its grip, the relief was palpable. The first signs of spring, snow melting, buds appearing, birdsong returning, signaled survival. On Plough Monday, villagers symbolically began the agricultural year, parading plowshares through the streets and singing to wake the soil. It was a celebration of renewal, a promise of brighter days ahead. The force of the wind and the violence of the flames carried burning rafters and sheets of lead extraordinary distances. With most buildings made of timber and crammed together, medieval cities were veritable tinderboxes. A stray spark or overturned candle could ignite an unstoppable inferno, especially when winter's gale-force winds fanned the flames into a frenzy. People fled through narrow, twisting streets, their homes consumed by fire behind them, often escaping with little more than the clothes on their backs. Tragedies were common. Families separated in the chaos, children trampled, and countless lives lost to the flames. Lacking modern firefighting technology, citizens could do little more than throw buckets of water or snow at the fire, praying the wind would shift before the entire city was reduced to ash. The devastation left thousands homeless and destitute in the depths of winter, forced to face the season's cruel elements without shelter. Yet, even without floods, blizzards, or fires, the simple, unrelenting cold was enough to bring suffering and death. In our modern world of central heating and thermal fabrics, it is hard to fathom the bone-chilling damp and constant dark that enveloped medieval winters. Smoky fires and layers of furs offered scant defense against the bitter cold that seeped into bones, sapping energy and will. Arthritis and rheumatism plagued many, worsening with each passing winter. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes, leaving them blackened and lifeless. Pneumonia and influenza spread quickly in overcrowded, poorly ventilated homes, where stale, smoky air made every breath a struggle. The cold didn't just chill the body, it drained vitality and spirit, leaving even the strong feeling sluggish and defeated. The 6th century British monk Gildas described winter's misery in his writings. The nights are long and dark, the days dreary and chill. The air bites with malice, icy blasts cut to the bone. All is blanketed in snow and frost. It is a time of great suffering for man and beast alike, when all the earth seems dead and frozen, locked in the clutches of a frigid hell. For the elderly and frail, winter was a season of dread. Fires sputtered and died, leaving only plumes of acrid smoke that stung the eyes and choked the throat. Extremities went numb, appendages froze, and the icy grip of winter pressed unrelentingly on the body and soul. The sick groaned in the darkness, their coughs and sniffles echoing alongside the crackle of dying embers. Even the young and healthy moved through the season with difficulty, their vigor drained by the cold. Winter was inescapable, and survival often came down to sheer endurance. There were no warm escapes, no heated blankets to stave off the chill. The medieval world measured time not in years or months, but by how many winters one had survived. To endure until spring was an achievement, a triumph that became harder with each passing season. But endure they did. When food supplies ran low, belts were tightened. When fires dwindled, another threadbare blanket was pulled close. When darkness pressed in, stories of brighter days to come were shared. The resilience of the medieval spirit was unmatched, a strength forged in the ice and stone of the harshest season. A 14th century English poem, Piers Plowman, captures this spirit. Through woe and winter's bale, frost and snow and sleet and hail, all shall pass, and peace prevail. Hope shall triumph and never fail. Even in the depths of winter, small joys and acts of grace shone through. Neighbors shared what little they had with those in even greater need. People came together to sing, pray, and hold on to hope. Some swore they could hear the voices of angels in the howling winds, promising the return of light and warmth. The simple act of gathering around a hearth, no matter how meager the fire, offered solace against the unrelenting chill. Smoke mingled with the aroma of baked bread or simmering stew, while stories and songs wove a fragile barrier against the darkness outside. But the cold showed no mercy. In drafty castles, even the wealthiest suffered. Piles of furs and roaring fires could not keep the damp at bay. Arthritis gnawed at royal bones as surely as it did peasant ones. The elderly King Arthur, described in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, shivered beneath his robes in his drafty hall, his teeth chattering as he spoke. Winter's storms brought further calamities. In 1216, King John of England's baggage train was swept away by a surging tide while crossing East Anglia's marshes. Priceless treasures, including the crown jewels, disappeared into the churning waters, never to be recovered. Days later, the grief-stricken king succumbed to dysentery, his health likely worsened by the bitter cold. Floods were another frequent scourge. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes the catastrophic flood of 1099. On St. Martin's Day, a great sea flood came through the length of this land and overran it as no man remembered before, drowning many towns and countless people. Another North Sea flood in 1219 submerged the Netherlands, killing over 50,000 people. With no warning systems or emergency shelters, medieval communities were utterly at the mercy of nature's fury. In response to these hardships, people banded together. Charity became vital, especially during the feast of St. Stephen, when lords provided meals for their tenants and churches, collected alms for the poor. The Lord of Misrule tradition brought moments of laughter and rebellion, as peasants briefly assumed roles of authority in playful subversion of social order. These fleeting moments of joy and unity offered a reprieve, however brief, from winter's relentless trials. People clung fiercely to hope, knowing that no matter how brutal the season, it was temporary. The sun would return, the snows would melt, and the world would awaken once more. And when spring finally arrived, it was a triumph. Green buds appeared on trees, rivers began to flow, and the promise of renewal filled the air. On Plough Monday, villagers celebrated the start of the agricultural year with parades, songs, and feasts. They awoke the soil, sowed their seeds, and rejoiced in the turning of the seasons. In the castles of the highborn, great hall fireplaces devoured endless stacks of wood, tirelessly fed by shivering servants. Yet even the mightiest nobles hesitated to step beyond the fire's glow. Winter's chill had a way of penetrating the thickest stone walls and richest furs, reducing even kings and queens to sufferers of the cold. For those of low birth, the season brought a far grimmer struggle. Their rough-hewn hovels offered scant protection from the biting winds. Meager rations of peat or wood, scavenged from the forest, barely fed the spluttering hearths. Families crowded together in squalid quarters, sharing body heat while breathing air thick with smoke and the fetid stench of unwashed humanity. Life was harsh, bleak, and unforgiving. Yet, even amid such hardship, glimmers of cheer could be found. Communal fires in the village square drew people from their hovels, offering brief respite. Around the leaping flames, neighbors exchanged jests and songs, momentarily forgetting their struggles. Young lovers stole secret kisses, their ardor unbroken by the cold, while children shrieked with delight as they slid across frozen ponds. Even the elderly felt their years lift for a time, transported back to the carefree winters of their youth. Such moments of merriment were rare and precious, for winter's onslaught was relentless. Empty bellies soon replaced laughter, as gnawing hunger became the poor's constant companion. Dreams of spring's bounty seemed cruel as the fields lay barren beneath blankets of snow. A failed harvest could spell doom, and many mothers watched helplessly as their children grew gaunt and pale, their eyes dull with the hollow stare of starvation. The desperation of scarcity drove some to unspeakable acts. Tales abound of those who resorted to unthinkable measures to fill their bellies, haunting the nightmares of the pious. Hunger, however, was not the only foe. Winter brought illnesses that preyed mercilessly on the weakened population. Pneumonia's hacking cough echoed through many a hovel, claiming lives as loved ones watched helplessly. Diseases like the pox and flux decimated entire families, sparing neither the old nor the young. Their frail bodies stood little chance against winter's relentless ravages. Those forced to brave winter's fury fared no better. Travelers risked life and limb on icy, treacherous roads, with many meeting their doom in swirling blizzards or plunging into snowdrifts. Their frozen corpses often lay undiscovered until the spring thaw, a grim reminder of nature's lethal power. Even valiant knights, clad in heavy armor, were not immune. Winter's chill seeped into every joint and rivet, numbing hands and slowing reflexes. Mighty war horses floundered in deep snowdrifts, their breaths steaming in the icy air. Winter spared no one. In royal halls, the weight of the crown grew heavier, as monarchs struggled to keep their courts supplied with provisions and firewood. Royal treasuries strained under the costs, as merchants capitalized on the season's necessities, reaping handsome profits. But for all its cruelties, winter's reign was not eternal. Even in the depths of despair, people clung to the promise of spring's renewal. The feast of St. Stephen offered a brief reprieve from winter's woes. For one joyous day, the world turned upside down as a lowly peasant became the lord of misrule, presiding over drunken revelry and bawdy songs. Laughter echoed through frostbitten lands, lifting spirits and reminding all of life's fleeting joys. Eventually, winter's icy grip began to loosen. Icicles dripped from eaves as the strengthening sun worked its magic. Snowdrops and crocuses pushed through the softening earth, heralding winter's retreat. Villages came alive with new energy, as hearts lifted and voices raised in joyful celebration. The Feast of the Plough marked the triumphant return of spring. Sleek oxen pulled gleaming plowshares through rich, dark soil as the cycle of planting and renewal began anew. The lean times of winter faded into memory as fields rippled with green and golden bounty. Looking back, the fortitude of medieval people is nothing short of extraordinary. Year after year, they endured winter's cruelty with a stoicism born of necessity. Their resilience and sense of community were the keys to their survival. In the face of unimaginable hardship, they found hope and moments of shared humanity. For the peasants who eked out a meager existence, warmth and light seemed to vanish entirely in winter's depths. With little more than rags on their backs and scant food in their bellies, they shivered in drafty hovels while the winds howled outside. The fortunate few with fireplaces huddled together in their flickering glow. For the majority, the only comfort was the shared heat of family and livestock packed in close quarters, their breath mingling with the fetid air. It's hard to imagine the coughing, fever, and aches that plagued them in such squalor. Yet even the highborn, for all their luxuries, were not spared. Medieval castles, with their towering stone walls and cavernous halls, became like iceboxes in winter. The chill seeped into every corner, defying even the mightiest hearths. Stories of royal winter woes abound. Queen Elizabeth Woodville, consort of King Edward IV of England, was said to have frozen to death in her own chambers on an uncommonly frigid night. Even the thickest furs and grandest feasts could not fully stave off the season's grasp. The hacking coughs of pneumonia, the gnawing pangs of hunger, the numbing chill that crept into every bone, these were the daily realities of medieval winter. The cold, damp air carried disease, while the weak succumbed to starvation. Roads became treacherous with ice, and snowdrifts swallowed travelers whole. Still, the people endured. They gathered around fires, shared what little they had, and sang songs of hope. The Feast of St. Stephen, with its laughter and role reversals, offered brief moments of joy. The frozen earth softened, and with it, spirits lifted. As spring returned, oxen plowed fields, seeds were sown, and life renewed itself once more. Medieval winters were brutal, but they also revealed the resilience of the human spirit. Year after year, people survived, proving their strength in the face of unimaginable hardship. While historical records may be murky and embellished, one account tells of a queen, swaddled in heavy robes and furs, succumbing to the unrelenting cold of a particularly harsh winter. By morning, she was found frozen stiff, a grim testament to winter's impartiality. Whether true or not, the story underscores the season's perilous nature, even for the privileged. Kings and queens might escape the gnawing hunger and squalid conditions endured by their subjects. But winter was, in some ways, a great equalizer. No wealth or status could command the elements to show mercy. The chill crept into even the most luxurious bedchambers, weaving through the thickest stone walls and finest tapestries. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, a collective grim endurance settled over medieval society. From the lowliest cotter to the loftiest lord, all braced themselves for winter's annual onslaught. Granaries were inspected, salted meats counted, and every scrap of firewood hoarded. Heavy woolen garments were donned in stoic anticipation. Yet, amid the bleakness, there was one spark of hope. The Christmas festivities surrounding the feast of St. Stephen on December 26th. For a few days, the gloom of winter lifted, replaced by laughter and revelry. The celebration brought communities together in a burst of joy and camaraderie. Central to the festivities was the appointment of a lord of misrule, often a peasant, who presided over feasts, dances, games, and general mischief. For a brief, shining moment, the rigid social order was gleefully upended. The lord of misrule issued absurd proclamations and orchestrated the day's chaos, delighting nobles and serfs alike. One can imagine the boisterous scenes, reed pipes wheezing, fiddles playing, and people twirling in riotous dances, faces flushed from the exertion and the warmth of shared humanity. Serf and noble mingled freely, boundaries blurred by goodwill. Young lovers exchanged stolen kisses, while children darted among the revelers, their laughter ringing through the frosty air. But, as all things must, the festive season ended. As the Yule log burned down to embers and the wassail bowls were emptied, the people returned to their hearths. The laughter faded, replaced by the harsh realities of winter's grip. For months, life seemed to slow to a frigid crawl. The land lay frozen and unworkable, leaving rural peasants to hunker down and wait for spring. The long nights and short days yawned endlessly, a chasm of cold and darkness. In their crude shelters, families huddled together, their hope as thin as the smoke rising from their sputtering fires. Yet, even in the cruelest winters, nature quietly prepared for renewal. Beneath the frozen ground, seeds lay dormant, ready to sprout at the first sign of warmth. For those who endured, spring would come, and with it, the promise of life's renewal. On Plough Monday, just after Epiphany, the agricultural year began anew. Fields once buried under snow were tilled, and seeds planted with a mixture of hope and desperation. The people emerged from their winter hibernation, leaner and tired but alive. Birds sang, and the earth awoke in vibrant greens and golds. But until then, the people had no choice but to endure. They drew comfort from their woolen cloaks, smoky hearths, and the meager stores they had carefully preserved. Most of all, they leaned on one another, finding strength in their shared hardship. In a world where even the seasons seemed determined to crush their spirits, medieval folk weathered the storm together. Lords and peasants alike shivered beneath the same gray winter sky, bound by a shared hope for spring's return. As the winds howled and ice groaned, they told tales and dreamed of brighter days. Perhaps they envisioned a kinder future, a world with warmer hearths and fuller bellies. Or perhaps they simply held fast to the scraps of light and hope they could muster, trusting that winter's reign would someday end. It is remarkable to think of their resilience, the strength required to endure such brutal conditions. While their bodies battled the cold, their spirits burned bright with an enduring belief that better days lay ahead. Even during the harshest winters, there were moments of levity and warmth. The Feast of St. Stephen, celebrated on December 26th, was one such occasion. Following the solemnity of Christmas Day, this midwinter celebration offered joy and release. The highlight was the custom of misrule, where a commoner was crowned Lord of Misrule and given free rein to preside over a topsy-turvy day of revelry. Class distinctions blurred as lords obeyed the whims of peasants, and laughter echoed through streets and halls. The Lord of Misrule led processions, orchestrated pranks, and decreed feasting and merriment for all. The celebration was marked by music, dancing, and games of chance and skill. Minstrels and jesters entertained the crowds, while children played in the snow. For one day, the usual hardships and social divides dissolved in a shared spirit of community and goodwill. But the feast was a brief respite, a flicker of light in winter's long shadow. Once it passed, the people returned to their struggles, bracing themselves for the weeks of icy darkness still to come. For the rural peasantry, winter was particularly unforgiving. Fields lay barren, and there was little to occupy their time besides survival. Huddled in smoky hovels, they prayed their food stores would last until the thaw. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, and illness claimed the weak and vulnerable. Travel was perilous, with icy roads and snowdrifts swallowing the unwary. Many travelers met their end in blizzards, their frozen bodies discovered only when the snow melted. Even knights, clad in heavy armor, struggled against winter's fury, their strength sapped by the cold. In the castles of the highborn, the season was no less daunting. Great halls consumed vast quantities of firewood, yet the chill persisted. Even royalty shivered in their opulent chambers, unable to escape winter's reach. The story of Queen Elizabeth Woodville, freezing in her own chambers, may be embellished, but it illustrates the inescapable nature of winter's wrath. Despite their hardships, medieval people found ways to endure. They clung to their traditions, drawing strength from the bonds of community. Feasts, fires, and stories offered brief moments of solace, reminding them of life's joys, even in the darkest times. As winter loosened its grip, hope began to stir. Icicles dripped, snow melted, and crocuses emerged from the earth. The land awoke, and with it, the people's spirits. On Plough Monday, villages celebrated the return of spring. Oxen pulled ploughs through thawing fields, and seeds were sown with prayers for abundance. The air buzzed with renewed energy as life's cycle resumed. Bawdy comedic sketches called mummers' plays were performed during medieval winter celebrations, reenacting tales from legend and folklore in exaggerated strokes. The antics of these plays, filled with mock jousts and farcical court proceedings, brought peals of laughter, a welcome respite from the harsh realities of winter life. No medieval celebration was complete without a hearty feast, and St. Stephen's Day was no exception. The Lord of Misrule, a chosen commoner, often demanded that the wealthy provide food and drink for the entire community. This charitable gesture fostered goodwill and fellowship among all, offering a rare moment of unity across societal divides. At the heart of the feast lay roasted meats, geese, capons, and the traditional boar's head, carried in with great fanfare. Mince pies, brimming with dried fruits and spices, provided a sweet treat, while the wassail bowl of warm, spiced cider kept spirits high. One can almost hear the joyous chatter and laughter rising above the blustery winds outside, as villagers reveled in the warmth of good company and hearty fare. For that one shining day, the hardships of winter faded into the background. The community gathered in joy, camaraderie, and a shared sense of relief. As the feast ended and the revelers dispersed to their homes, they carried with them the warmth of fellowship, a flicker of cheerful firelight in the darkness. Knowing they could rely on one another, that moments of laughter and levity were possible, even in the bleakest times, surely buoyed their spirits for the hard days ahead. The icy grip of winter seemed less harsh when bellies were full, hearts were light, and hope for the season's end flickered, however, faintly. The feast of Saint Stephen served as a reminder that even the deepest darkness of winter would eventually yield to the first hopeful stirrings of spring. As the snow began to recede and the frozen ground thawed, fragile shoots of new life emerged. The sight of snowdrops, brave little flowers pushing through the slush, brought renewed hope to weary villagers. Their fresh green stalks and delicate white blooms heralded the end of winter's long night. In villages everywhere, people rejoiced at the first signs of color and vitality returning to the land. Hibernating livestock were let out to graze on pastures just beginning to green, while farmers hitched their teams to plows and churned the softening earth. The first Monday after Epiphany, known as Plow Monday, marked this pivotal moment. It was a time of preparation and anticipation, as plows stored during winter were blessed in festive processions through the fields. The village bustled with renewed energy as faces turned toward a sky brightening to pale blue. Farmers collected seeds, readying themselves to sow the first rows of crops. Plowmen went door to door, gathering food, ale, and small coins in exchange for the promise of a fruitful harvest. Among these scenes, one might picture a weather-beaten grandmother holding the hands of two wide-eyed children. She kneels to show them how to plant peas, passing down knowledge her own grandmother once shared. The smaller child giggles as a wriggling earthworm escapes the dirt, while the older one solemnly presses each seed into its hollow. Moments like these, where life and learning intertwined, made the privations of winter worthwhile. The warmth in the grandmother's smile as she shared her wisdom was a promise that the dark days had passed and the season of renewal had begun. As the sun coaxed green shoots from the soil, winter's specter finally released its icy hold. The oppressive weight of cold and darkness gave way to the gentle breezes and vibrant colors of spring. Reflecting from our modern vantage point, it's sobering to consider the immense fortitude medieval people needed to endure such brutal winters. With none of the comforts we take for granted, their very survival was a marvel. Yet amid unimaginable hardship, they found cause for celebration, joy, and hope. The warmth of community, the promise of spring, and the power of laughter and fellowship guided them through winter's darkest depths. Even in the harshest conditions, they clung to life, emerging stronger and ready to face another year. The resilience of our medieval ancestors serves as an enduring testament to the human spirit. Their ability to endure and find joy amidst unimaginable challenges is both humbling and inspiring. The laughter of St. Stephen's Day resonated across villages and castle halls alike. Reed pipes wheezed, fiddles played lively tunes, and villagers danced in swirling circles, their faces flushed from exertion and joy. Children scampered through the revelry, their giggles mingling with the boisterous chatter of their elders. The Lord of Misrule, a chosen peasant or jester, was the star of the day. Issuing absurd proclamations, orchestrating mischief, and presiding over the festivities, he brought laughter and a touch of chaos. His grandiose declarations and ridiculous edicts delighted the crowd, creating a temporary escape from the rigid social hierarchy. Central to the celebrations were mummers' plays, comedic sketches that exaggerated legends and folklore. Mock jousts and farcical court proceedings drew peals of laughter, offering a brief respite from the grim realities of winter life. The day's feast was equally grand. Villagers gathered around long tables, laden with roasted meats, mince pies, and warm wassail. The air filled with the rich aroma of spices and roasted boar, mingling with the sound of clinking mugs and merry songs. For one precious day, the hardships of winter seemed distant, replaced by a spirit of camaraderie and celebration. As the festivities ended, the warmth lingered in the hearts of the villagers, sustaining them through the long, cold months ahead. Yet, as the feast passed, winter tightened its grip once more. Snow blanketed the fields, and icy winds howled through the cracks of poorly insulated homes. Hunger gnawed at empty stomachs as food stores dwindled. The threat of illness loomed large, with respiratory infections claiming many lives. The land lay dormant, the frost-bound soil unyielding to any attempts at cultivation. Peasants huddled in smoky hovels, their hope flickering like the embers of their fires. Even the wealthiest nobles, ensconced in grand castles, could not escape winter's chill. The cold seeped into every corner, defying even the mightiest hearths. Travelers faced treacherous journeys, their paths obscured by snow and ice. Many succumbed to the elements, their frozen bodies discovered only when the thaw arrived. Yet, despite the hardships, medieval folk endured. As winter loosened its icy grip, signs of renewal began to appear. Snowdrops blossomed, and the earth stirred to life once more. Villages buzzed with activity as people prepared for the agricultural season. Plough Monday marked the turning point, with communities coming together to bless their tools and sow the seeds of a new year. The return of spring was not just a physical renewal, but a spiritual one. It symbolized hope, resilience, and the promise that life would continue. The hardships of winter became a distant memory as fields flourished with green and golden crops. Looking back, the resilience of medieval people is nothing short of extraordinary. They faced winter's trials with courage, unity, and hope, emerging stronger on the other side. Their story reminds us of the power of community and the enduring spirit of humanity. As we sit in our warm homes, insulated from the elements, let us remember those who came before us. Their strength and resilience are a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure and thrive, no matter the challenges.